is a little fern garden. It's growing in the shade of shrubs and some redbud trees that have become quite tall. And so this is a demonstration of how you can have a fern garden and growing plants in the shade. There are not many flowering plants that will do well in shade, but the ferns really like the shade, mainly because they need the moist area, and when you have an open area, that tends to be hotter and drier. So I have a variety of ferns here, which I have done deliberately because I wanted to have representatives of various kinds of ferns here. So we're coming now to the end of the ferns, and we end with one called the red lady fern. And when it was planted, there was a tree that was giving it a lot of shade. And see, it's called the red lady fern because the middle of the leaf, also known as the midrib or rachis, is red. It's redder at some times of the year than it is at the moment. But some of you may be looking for the flowers in these ferns. Well, one of the things that makes ferns different than from other plants is that they do not reproduce. They don't produce new plants from seed, so therefore there are no flowers. But they do have something called spores. So this is another example of where the spores, which produce new plants, are formed. This is on the underside of the leaf. You can see there are little clusters here, and those are little spore cases which have lots and lots of spores in them. This is probably the most common way that ferns produce spores. And this is an example here that we're showing of a special leaf. This fern produces special leaves, and their whole function is to produce spores. So you can see they're brown, and they're filled with spores, and they're different than the green leaves, and which produce the food for the plant. So this fern is an example of a different way that the spores are on the leaves, because in this example, the spores form on special leaflets at the end of the leaf. You can see we have two here, and this brown structure, each of these little leaflets on here are made to produce spores, and that's why they're brown. The spores have already been shed. They shed early in the summer, but of course this does not become green afterwards. It stays brown. So ferns can grow but from spores, but probably the main way that ferns reproduce is by underground stems. And this Christmas fern is an example of a fern which does grow by underground stems, but it's a very short underground stem, so that you get a mass of plants, so you don't see the distinct plants. So another example of the vegetative growth, which is clear to see, but the opposite of the Christmas fern, is the ostrich fern. And it's called the ostrich fern because, particularly in the spring, they have the plant has a vase shape, rather like the plumes of an ostrich. And you can see here that there are individual plants because the underground stem extends much farther than in the Christmas fern, so that you have a number. And you can see that there are new plants coming up that are coming from the nearby plants. The maidenhair fern is another example of a fern which we find locally in the woods in Ohio, but which is unlike the next fern, which is called the Japanese holly fern because of the shape of the leaves. And this fern, the leaves also last a long time, not all winter like the Christmas fern, but they will last quite a long time. It's probably because the leaves are the leaflets are rather thick and leathery. And you can see a new leaf has come out, so you have a contrast in green. So even though we don't have colorful flowers in a fern garden, you can see different shades of green in a fern garden, which give you more interest. So this fern is called the royal fern, and it's from a group of ferns, a genus Osmunda, that is a very ancient fern. You know, the ferns go back to the days of the dinosaur, back to the Carboniferous period, and so ferns are have very ancient ancestors. Well, and another thing we can see with this fern is the big difference in leaves. So this is one leaf, it's here, and another leaf can be seen here. So the leaves are quite large, and you can see that each leaf has another structure on it that looks like another leaf, but it's called a leaflet, and that is divided into more little leaflets. So here's an example of a fern that can bring more color to the garden. This is not the best time of year to see it, but along the middle of the leaflet, there's a silvery color, and which is much more pronounced earlier in the year. This is called the Japanese painted fern, and it is a variety which obviously comes from Japan. So ferns can produce variety in the garden, both by the shape of the fern and by the color of the foliage, the shape of the foliage and the diversity of the foliage, and even color. And there are some ferns which have produced bronze leaves in the spring, and then as the leaves are in the fall, they develop a red and bronzy color in the fall. So for people who are interested in creating their own fern garden, which can be part of a larger garden, they can be interspersed between other plants which will grow under the same conditions. And that is, when you are planting ferns, you want to plant them in a place that will be shaded most of the day and will not get too dry. So if you plant them under a tree that requires a lot of water, the fern may not be so successful. Or you want to choose a fern which can do better under dry conditions. So planting them in an area that is naturally more moist is ideal. Like in this particular area of my garden, the lawn absorbs a lot of water and retains it, so it can release the water slowly to the garden. But one thing to remember in having a fern garden is that at least once a summer, probably mid-July, you should give your fern garden a deep watering. And I don't mean with a hose, but put up a sprinkler and let it run on the garden until the soil is really well saturated with water. And if you do that, then the rest of the summer it can be relatively maintenance-free. Now, in this garden, I try every other year to put mulch down around the ferns so that the mulch will help keep the moisture in and contribute nutrients to the soil for the ferns.